Hey, Sherry.
In progress.
Me. All right. We'll give it one more minute. A little grace period for everyone to join us. Thanks for all being here. Right. Looks like we'll need one more person for quorum. Text people if you have their numbers readily available.
Hey, Sherry, would you mind messaging Patricia?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thanks, Sherry. I think Jaja is going to be out today as well.
You all are willing to wait. We'll see if we get one more participant so we can utilize our hour effectively. Thank you, Kelsey. We actually got a note from Noah that they will be joining later, a little bit late. So we can scratch that one off the list that we did connect with Noah.
I don't have her number, but I did. I emailed her, so she looked at it.
Thanks, Sherry.
Well,
Beth, we can probably get started. I think people will join us as time goes on, hopefully.
Yay. I'm happy to see everyone join us, but I'm also really happy to see Martha join us, just given now we reach quorum. Okay.
Sorry, I was late.
No worries. We are happy you are here. Alex, do you want to get us started?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go through the names if you just want to say present. Devin Koenig Cease.
Present.
Cute. Noah Fay. Not here yet. Eddie Matlock Mahone.
Present.
Martha Linder.
Present.
Portia Anderson.
Present.
Patricia Sam. Elliot Hart.
Present.
Antoinette Lambert. Kelsey Beckmeyer.
Present.
Jaja Floyd. Not here. Kenyatta Carol Hillman. Barry Tillman.
Here.
With 7 members present, quorum is met.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
So we'll start with our theory of change. And our theory of change states that if we create a homeless response system that centers on people who have lived experience of homelessness, then we will be able to meet needs and eliminate inequalities in order to end homelessness for all. Alex, would you like to do our land acknowledgement?
Yeah, of course. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. We make this acknowledgement to remind ourselves that by being here today, we strive to remedy this injustice through our beliefs and actions in helping to steward our green spaces and communities in Seattle.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you all here. We have a few guests in the room that I'd love for them to introduce themselves. We have our coordinated entry team at the KCRHA. These are the folks who are who you or your staff may be interacting with, and they are kind of running the coordinated entry behind the scenes as well as in front of the scenes, I would say many times. But we would love to take a moment just to introduce themselves. And then after that, I want to do just a quick introduction of our community impact team, who will be taking just a quick moment as we run through some of our presentation here. They might be speaking up, so I'd love for them to introduce themselves as well. So I will start with Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Leah Sima Fahori, she, her pronouns, and I am the program coordinator on the coordinated entry team. It's lovely to see you all.
Nicole?
Nicole Fillmore Mashesha. I'm on the coordinated entry team as a program specialist, and I support youth and young adults 18 to 24. And I use she, they pronouns. Thank you for having us today.
Tom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Regan. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a program specialist on the coordinated entry team working primarily with the single adults population.
And I just wanted to share that there are 2 other members on the coordinated entry team, 2 other specialists, Karina Jordan Hernandez, who is the program specialist for the veteran space, AIN and True Blood space, and then Surya Aguilar, who manages the family resources. They're in case conferencing currently, and so they can't be here until 11. So just wanted to share that they are also part of the team.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, as you can see, we have a robust team kind of split up by subpopulations. So really trying to support and specialize in those areas. And one of the great things that the team does is we are cross-trained in helping to support other spaces. So let's say if Nicole's out, we have Tom jumping in, for example, to help support that. So while we all have our specializations, we really want to ensure cross-training and understanding so that we can lend support across the board. And then, as you all know, I'm putting out that plug here. We are hiring a CES manager, and we are looking for candidates. You can go to our website to look at the job description and or direct anyone there. And that's our coordinated entry team. You'll be seeing their faces probably in several other meetings here, but just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce themselves. And we also have Claire here, who I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Gilmet. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the analytic product manager at the Regional Homelessness Authority and part of the community impact team. And it's a long-winded way of saying that I work with our HMIS data. And so that's kind of my role here. Good to be here, thanks.
Great, thank you, Claire. Thank you. All right, so today we have a presentation. We had to cancel our last meeting, so I appreciate you all being understanding about that. We want to take a moment today to circle back on our conversation where we were elevating the different components and what we see as important to us. And back in February, I really promised to provide you some data behind that. Like, we do need to look at data to understand our overall system. And while we may not have every single piece of data, we want to identify maybe what we're missing, right? Where do we want to concentrate? But we definitely have some really good data to help us facilitate and talk about this conversation of coordinated entry system and looking at it in its entirety, from access to assessment to nominations, referrals, move-in, and then ultimately stability. Those are really key components of coordinated entry. So I want to bring us back to that conversation. I have a little bit of a presentation. I'm gonna run through it. I want you all to take notes, write down. We're gonna have time at the end to have a discussion. We'd really love to just get through the presentation, kind of ground us in that. But please take notes. Please, we can go back and flip through the presentation, talk about it more. This isn't just a one-sided, hey, we're going to throw numbers at you, but I think it will spark a lot of different ideas that we've been thinking. And so please write those down. We'll circle back. We'll talk about it. And I want to hear ideas, like, where do we need to look, or what trends are we focusing on? Where do we need to focus, given, we all have our preconceived notions, and I had mine before looking at this too. And it's interesting to see some data behind it and understand, like, do we need to dig deeper on this data, or do we need to look at it in a different way? So I'll get us started there. I just kind of wanted to ground us in it in a moment. All right. Can everyone see this? I didn't see head nods.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, great. It's like, I didn't see a head nod, but thank you for responding. Okay. Well, fancy page. Okay, so the goal of coordinated entry and the system is really to ensure households experiencing homelessness have equitable housing to housing resources and to quickly resolve their homelessness, right? We're talking about equitable access and quickly moving them through the system. Now, let's keep that in mind as we talk about this, right? How are we thinking about our data? How are we thinking about our process? How are we thinking about the system in general to ensure that we're getting equitable access and quickly moving people through? And when we say quickly, we aren't talking about a day or two. We know that's unrealistic, but we also don't want it to be a year, 3 years, a month. Like, we really want to be thinking about what quickly means for a system. All right, so this is a big one, throwing some numbers out there. We have kind of our access. This is moving us through the process, right? And I want to use process and system very differently. System is its entirety. Process is the way we manage the system. So we can make systems improvements through a process, or we can impact we can look at our system to develop new processes, right? So let's take a moment to look at this. We have access, assessment, nominations, referrals, referral completion, which is move-in, right? And stability. So as we look at this, we have access at our RAP sites with outreach teams, day centers, and shelters. That's currently how our system is set up. There may be gaps here, like I can think of one. I'm sure you can think of one too. One I think of is self-referrals, right? Like that's real. But currently those are our 4 ways to access coordinated entry. Assessment. We have some big numbers here that I kind of want to explain. There are 14,091 unique households enrolled in the CES program. That's just talking about, you know, they've completed the program profile in HMIS. We have, they're enrolled. That doesn't mean they're actively being worked on, right? That's just enrollment in general in that program. We also know that there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands more people experiencing homelessness. So that's a fraction of the people who are experiencing homelessness are actually in the CES program. Now, when we break that down and look at the past year, there's been 7,209 households assessed since then. So those are likely the people who are actively being engaged at this moment, right? Like if we can deduce it down, you're looking at probably half of the people enrolled are actually being worked with. And it may be even less than that because they were enrolled literally a year ago. Then we move on to nominations and you'll see a decrease in the number of folks here, right? Nominations, there's sorry, I feel like that number changed in the last day. 300 and or almost 4,000 unique households being nominated. So that's kind of where these are my perceptions. I want you to make your perceptions here. I would say we're probably working with 4,000 people right now in our system to get them into coordinated entry. And of those 4,000 people, there are about 24,520 times that they're being nominated. And you notice this is duplicative, right? Like we have unique individuals and then we have duplicative nominations. That means you're nominating someone about 6 times. 6 times. If you break it down, we know some are nominated 18 times or 20 times, but on average, it's about 6 times that they're being nominated for a resource before even getting to the referral stage, right? So referrals, let's dwindle it down even more. We have 1,838. I'm using round numbers. You can see the real numbers there. 1,800 duplicative referrals to units. So this is where it gets tricky, right? Where we were talking about unique households. Now we're talking about duplicative referrals to units. And what that means is a unit can come online several times. When we look at move-ins, there's 722 households that moved into units. That means really there's 722 units open. And so we're opening up those units on average at least twice. Now, again, we know that one unit may come through and be filled, and another unit may come in and it's open 4 or 5 times, right? And it keeps cycling through. And that's where you get the 1,800 referrals. So it's interesting to see, just we have 722 units in the past year. Let me make sure I'm clear on that. In the past year that have opened up and been moved in. Now we all know there's probably like 10, 15 really open right now. Let's just keep it at, here's the data, 722 in the past year that have opened. And we have 14,000 people sitting in the queue. Maybe 4,000 people actually being navigated into this. That's a huge, huge amount of people trying to vie for these limited, very limited resources. And we know that's an issue of coordinated entry, right? Like, we know that we can't build ourselves out of this fast enough. But how do we become the best stewards that we can of the limited resources that we have to make sure that we're making those adequate referrals so that we aren't putting them up there 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So that's something we can think about. I'm going to move us on. Make sure to take notes. Right. Length of time. So as we look at kind of that exact same layout, we want to look at the length of time that folks are sitting in the queues. So from assessment to referral, after someone's been assessed, how long is it taking for them to actually get to the referral state where they've been nominated and they're actually being approved for a unit? The median is 41 days. It's taking over a month for them to actually get referred to a unit on average, median. The lowest, the quickest we're doing it is about 7 days. The longest it's taken is 350 days, over a year. From referrals to move-in, and I actually think this is pretty good on a median standpoint, 26 days. So about a month. You can always do better, but a month. When we get to the high, 641 days, 2 years, 2 years. That's mind-boggling to me. But the low is 7 days. That's amazing. I love it for those folks that got in 7 days. That's incredible. So what improvements can we make from that referral to move in? Is it more information sharing with the housing provider to the service provider who are doing those nominations and referrals? Is it like more education around that? Is it that we need to look at how we are doing paperwork, either pre or post? What is the housing provider requiring in the paperwork, and how can we upstream that? Maybe that's something. I'm just throwing out ideas, but I want to hear your ideas too. On the assessment to referral, how do we break down that time, right? Like, how do we look at, after we assess someone, like, how many times do we need to meet with them to understand what's the appropriate resource for them? Let's break that down. All right. So as we look at the system, we can get anywhere. I'm going to bring us back to this literally every single time. We need to look at it as a system. We need to understand kind of how we're looking at all these components and what's the low hanging fruit. And I know most people don't like that because maybe it's not the easiest thing, maybe isn't the most impactful, but we can maybe choose something that, you know, isn't going to take 3 years to change. We can choose a few steps that, and I want this committee to be very instrumental in that respect, like highlighting where we think we can make the most impact, but it's also not going to take us 4 years to do, right? Like we need a good weighing balance of where we approach this. Nominations, here's another really great data point. The average number of nominations per resource by population. And there are a few populations we don't have on here. There's data quality, right? Like let's call it out now. One of the trends we noticed in pulling this data is there's data quality issues with certain like subpopulations or how we're getting things into HMIS, but we're trying our best to weed that out right now. So when we look at the average number of nominations per resource, single adults, on average, 16 people for one resource are being nominated. I look at Tom. Tom's managing the single adult space and how many he's got to go through for each resource. Like, how are we prioritizing those who have the highest need? And how could we, I'm throwing it out there, I'm not going to answer this. How could we be better informed so it's maybe more comparable to young adults, that it's 4 people per resource where we have better like early on matching before we get to the nomination process, right? Like, how are we educating our providers around what this resource is? And it's looking at blind referrals. That's a component. But that's 16 per one unit. Families, 10 families, almost 11 families per one unit. Then we have 4 for young adults. And I'm going to bring us out to a systems level again. As we look at our subpopulations, it's going to be really hard to tackle single adults really quickly, right? But we know a lot of work needs to be done there. So we don't want to neglect not looking at how we make systems improvements there, but also low-hanging fruit, we're really close to young adults, right? Like, could we reach a functional 0 with some subpopulation? Is that something we want to focus on as a committee and elevate? Could we reach functional 0? Because we also know that young adults lead to single adults, right? So how do we keep that moving through so that we aren't impacting another subpopulation in this? Food for thought. But this is what data can tell us and where we should be thinking. Noah, just really quick, we're going to take questions at the end. So please just write them down and we'll get to it. And welcome. All right, bringing us back. We're looking at the whole system. I know you probably don't want to see this slide again, but I really want you to focus on all the components. Demographics, this is a big one. This is huge, right? What I was happily surprised with these demographics in the sense that if you look at how people are moving from assessment to referral to move-in, the populations are pretty like, we're keeping it equitable as people go through the process. That's a great accomplishment. I was expecting it to be all over the place. I was happily surprised. But what I also want to know is this representative of those experiencing homelessness based on our point in time count? based on what we're seeing? And how do we look at access in the very beginning of these populations? So for example, we know that AIAN, American Indian Alaskan Native, is not representative of the 3%, 2% is not representative of the population experiencing homelessness. That's real. So what are we doing in our access point to ensure that these demographics are more representative of folks experiencing homelessness? But once they do get into the system, it's pretty equitable. That's incredible. So how do we change the front end to that? Maybe that's where we need to concentrate instead of looking at as people are moving through, because the data is telling us that we're doing pretty well, right? Here we are again. And I'm gonna say that is it for the presentation, but I'm gonna open it up for conversations. I'm sure you were expecting more data. So let's hear what you all think. I would love to hear initial thoughts. I would love to hear kind of where you're thinking based on what's been presented. I'm more than happy to go through some slides again, talk about numbers. We'll be taking notes. I want this to be an active conversation. Opening it up.
Well, I'll start. I'm driving, so I wasn't able to take notes, but I'm gonna try to remember because I had something to say at the time, like about 3, 4 that you said. I think as far as, I guess, backtracking with the natives, maybe working with like different communities like Chiefsville and other Native communities to get those referrals for families. I think that's one area. And then on the, I don't know, the duplication that are going in the system. I don't know if everybody is put in HMIS when they're doing assessment. If not, then maybe that's a good idea. And then if so, with the HMIS, like, you know, make it to where, you know, they can't, you know, like you'll see if there's a duplication when you enter the information. And then I have to remember what else I was going to say. But, yeah. And this is Sherry.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherry. Thoughts on that? Opening it up to the group.
Oh, and one more thing too, I remembered. I don't remember how much staff it is. But if we're kind of falling short, maybe we need to hire more people. Maybe there's more people that need to be hired. So to cut to be able to, get things done more faster. And then also there was talking about the time, like how much time for the needs. And I say however many times, not just one time, you know, and that's it. But however many times that person needs it, we need.
And when you say more staff, you mean with the providers? Or are you thinking the internal process?
Internal.
Okay. Noah?
Yeah, thanks for sharing this data. Couple thoughts on one of the questions you posed, Beth, around driving down the number of referrals per opportunity. So I think it's the next slide that shows that. No population group is a monolith, obviously, and I don't think anyone thinks so, but I've always worried a bit around the single adult group. It's the largest group of the three by my understanding, by a wide margin. And I think I think the fact that single adults are viewed for the purposes of this process as one giant group really contributes to this, especially given different resources are designed to meet the needs of different subgroups of single adults intentionally. And I think if we were a little more nuanced and refined about how we thought about that population group and really intentionally tried to do work to connect, but separate out the specifics of different resources with the populations they're designed to serve, we could drive that number way down and probably fill those units quicker. To the slide a couple slides ago about between assessment to nomination, that is way too long. We got to drive that number down. We have high needs people everywhere in our community, and the fact it's taking us that long to nominate someone to a unit is just unconscionable. And I think we can really, it's great. We're moving on that. I know everyone's aligned on trying to move that number down, but I think part of it is we aren't nuanced in the way we think about the actual resources we have to bear. And we've done some recent work with some kind of local preference work that's tied into funding requirements for specific buildings that has, I think, really helped us be more refined. And I think lessons learned from that process could be applied system-wide for efficiency's sake. So to your point about not 4-year solutions, I think there's stuff that's working in pockets now that might be more scalable than we think.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts from the group? Oh, wait, where'd you, Devin? You like just on me.
I didn't want to cut anyone else off, but yeah, no, thank you. This data is really really helpful. It's really good to see. And I think the questions I have seeing all of this is I know that I hear like anecdotally in this space and also in my work with providers and with the community that documentation is such a huge barrier, and that especially documentation of homelessness and chronic homelessness, and also just like basic things like having an ID are getting in the way a lot. And so I think having a better understanding of like the reason for maybe denial of a referral and what's showing up most frequently could help us figure out where to target resources. Like, is there a specific type of, is there a specific piece of documentation or part of the referral process where people are consistently getting held up? Yeah, so that we can try to figure out like where to target resources. I think that's one area of work that I'm thinking about.
Sure. And I'm going to look to Claire for a moment on denials. Maybe Claire can show us just a little bit about that from an HMIS standpoint, but we'll get there.
About, just to clarify the question, specifically what about denials?
Reasons for denial at referral.
Yeah, I think looking at the data for that, we mostly see a category called client refused, which is like kind of unfortunately like titled, I think, but recording in it's that the unit or the opportunity doesn't match with the client's needs is how I interpret that. The next most common is unable to connect with client, some ineligibles. It's really, I think I'm looking at of all the referrals, we have indicated that 23 are denied by property manager. Like, so even more are self-resolved, client housed. I see 24 referrals than denied by property manager. So it's much more about the match than about property managers denying.
that's some good insight to hear that, the majority of it is either you can't find a client or they denied it. So what are we doing on the front end to talk about that, right? Like what education could we give our service providers around units? And I know that Noah was like, we're doing some great things. So like, how do we emphasize that and like build upon what we're already doing in that space to make it work better? And like, that could be an area that we tackle and brainstorm out. Eddie?
Just kind of building off of what like Devin was saying around like documentation though and things like that. I know some of the work that I'm currently working on with CCS/CCA now, and us making a centralized compliance team and intake team is we're really looking at what it is our funder is requiring versus what we are requiring. And if it's not required by our funder, we're cutting it. Like, I mean, and I think that can be a huge help with a lot of agencies that are out there, particularly around those documentation requirements. Like, I mean, I still see some postings where it says like they want an ID or driver's license and the social security card. Like, I don't know of any funder that actually requires a Washington State ID or an actual social security card. Like, I mean, we already know SHA and KCHA, both will accept Clarity IDs, and it just needs to be a documented social security number from some government entity. That's it. Like, I mean, and so I think if we start to see those more out there, like maybe the RHA as the funder and kind of the administrator of it, maybe should start having those types of conversations with those housing providers. Like, hey, is there another reason you have this barrier there? Because it's a barrier. And let's, I'm not going to call anybody, any particular agency out in this meeting, but like have those conversations, like what can we do to support you to get past that and to not have that additional requirement there? Because that's a big one. And because I mean, yeah, like Devin said, there's a number of people who they get turned down because they get the referral, but then the day afterwards, like their wallet gets stolen. And so now they're starting all over, and maybe it was an out-of-state ID, and so now they're having to go through the whole rigmarole of trying to get a Washington State ID for the first time. Like I've had so many clients that has happened to.
Portia?
Yeah, I have kind of an observation similar to what I mean Devin mentioned, and then a question about data. First observation / question. I think something that I'm curious if we've ever reached out or worked on coordinating with the property managers who manage a lot of these housing sites. Sometimes I find that is a little bit of a gap. Like they're never in these spaces with us. Like I'm thinking like third-party property management's not like the housing providers that manage buildings internally. But there's some big ones like Allied and Quantum and things like that, and they're not in these spaces. And sometimes it's like we're speaking different languages, or why are we working so hard to efficiently move or like quickly move folks in, right? And like there can be a disconnect, or even like why it might be hard to get documentation. Like there's a disconnect, and you can do so much to like work and educate, but ultimately oftentimes they have a different end goal, right? Like they are a business and they're trying to do things a certain way, and compliance is really important. And so I think we've seen, like, I know we have one specific property that's really impacted by this, where the property management, we can do everything on our end, and still it's 90+ days from referral to move in, no matter what we're doing. And so, yeah, just curious if we've ever like tried to bridge that gap with some of the, I don't know how many programs in our county are impacted by third-party property management. I know feels like a lot of the single young adult or like the young adult population, there seems to be a lot of that. And then similar to the question about why referrals are being denied, I'm curious, even with nominations, do we have any information on that? Like, I'm curious if why some nominations, like we are seeing whatever you said, I think there was like 14 nominations or whatever. Are all of those eligible, or is there any information kind of shedding light on there's gaps in our system, so they're being weeded out even before they're being referred? So I'm guessing at the referral level, we think there's some element of eligibility that's there, right? But with the nominations, I'm curious if there's any information there, and maybe that's not our job, but I was just curious, like if that's highlighting like truly we just don't have enough stock, or maybe we don't have the right kind of like housing support stock.
So both very valid points and questions. I think that, you know, pointing out the third party support with our property managers is definitely an area that could be a focus of ours, especially as we talk about documentation. And also, I think it needs to be all parties in the room, right? Especially because it's harder for KCRHA to hold the third party responsible because we can hold the provider responsible, right? So we need them to come on board with what their provider is saying, and how do we work with the provider to make sure that's happening. So all valid. And nominations, I think that the team can speak a little bit to this more. A lot of the nominations, I'll let the team speak to it. So if Tom or Leah or, you know, Karina just joined us, and I don't know where Nicole went, but yes, any of you want to pick that up? Just a little tip.
Yeah, I can kind of share like, I think what you're raising is a really like great point. And I think there is some validation of of eligibility. Well, there's always a validation of eligibility when we've identified the person that we're intending to move forward through to the referral. However, analyzing all of the nominations we received to determine eligibility and what that is not currently able to happen due to our capacity. So, you know, it depends on the population space, just based on the number of referrals and nominations we're seeing and the number of resources we're handling on a day-to-day basis. But for example, in the single adult space, 16-1, you know, that's a generous number. It's usually a little higher than that, but, you know, to be able to go through all of those nominations and validate for each person their eligibility, that they have all of the eligibility criteria, is not something that we can feasibly do in like that 2-hour time chunk that we have to like send all of our referrals. And so what we will do for sure is, if we have identified the person who is receiving the resource based on tie breaking, we will always have a conversation to determine service match and eligibility to ensure that it is the right match to that resource. And we will continue to do that until we find the right person. I don't know if team, you wanted to share any more insight into that, but that's kind of where we're at right now with our process.
Thanks, Leah. I'm just citing time. So Kelsey, I know you have your hand up. I am gonna let you speak. And then after that, I do want to continue this conversation and be able to provide more data, more information kind of at our next meeting. So I'll let Kelsey speak, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for that.
Thanks, Beth. Going back to what Sherry was just discussing with access, I think this might be something that we want to be able to look at later in time. I think that we have a few process points that may be more pertinent to be looking at initially, so that we're not, I'm thinking about like, what is the impact of bringing more people, never mind, I don't know. My brain is just thinking about access, but when we're have so few resources and impacts of like bottlenecking. But when looking at access points, how are we ensuring that like we're diversifying who we are talking about as access points? Do we have really like culturally specific access points in order to ensure that there is equity and access? The other piece that I just want to uplift in terms of looking at demographics, when we're looking at who's being assessed to referred to housed, I'm seeing parity there versus equity as we're looking at how people are moving through the system. So I don't know if we can look at equity of the system until we look at what is our population compared to who's moving through the system. And then thinking about HMIS and data, are we able to expand denial reasons so we can get better data and better information about why people are being denied or what their reasons are? From what Claire was sharing, some of the categories are just very broad. So are we able to narrow those things down a little bit to have some better data and information on that end? And in relation to HMIS, utilizing that in its best way of maintaining documents. I see Elliot kind of put something here in the chat as well of being able to track information, but it can also be a hub to hold necessary documentation. That can be where income documentation is kept. It can be where disability verification documentation is kept. So really using our tools to the best of their capacity at this moment in time can be a couple of those little things that we could do to help make some of those improvements down the line.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. Just trying to keep us on time. I'm going to give us 3 minutes to talk about maybe any potential data, and you may or may not be able to collect everything, but potential data that you all would like to see based on kind of what we presented today. If there's any other furthering data that we can maybe dig into. I heard Kelsey on, and we heard everyone on kind of the denial reasons. We can show you what we currently have. That's not to say that we can do this improvements right now, but we can at least show you what we currently have to better understand that. So that's one point. Any other data people would like to see to help kind of formulate and better understand for our next meeting? Or maybe you just don't know and we can dig in and see what other key points we can pull.
How's her hand raised?
Because
Oh, I had it, I lowered it, but I think another piece, if we can look
Janelle
at.
does. I don't know if in the attendees, but sorry.
If we are able to look at the PIT information versus the access information to get a better idea on what does access into our system look like.
great. Okay.
I think it would be helpful because also just kind of tying it in, one of the big questions, at least from on the shelter provider side, that we've been raising is that throughput question. So I think of those referrals, maybe trying to break it down. Where were they coming from? Was it from a shelter? Was it a mobility request? Was it from an outreach? Like, I mean, so we can really start to see where some of those things are. I mean, are there shortcuts that are happening for people that are causing the bottlenecks in shelters that because we prioritized other populations? So it's just, yeah, I think that's something we should really start to dig into.
Great. Noted. Janelle has her hand up, and Janelle, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Oh, yes. Janelle Rothfolk, she, her. I'm with KCRHA. I'm on the data analytics team with Claire. So just tracking all of these. And I see Martha has her hand up, so I want to hear from Martha. But I do want to say for the one for Noah, for dividing the single adult subpopulation, I'm hoping that maybe we could connect a little on that. I'd be curious to learn a little bit more. Is Noah still on? Did he jump? Oh, he
No,
jumped.
but we can make note of it.
Okay, I will follow up because I would be very curious to see how they're thinking about the single adult population in different categories, especially as we look towards developing by name lists.
Thanks to know. And Martha.
So it's similar to what others have said about tracking specifics of why properties would deny an application, also looking at why the nominees are declining the units.
This is Janelle again. I would also be more curious in working with this group and understanding how you all define throughput. Because for us, we see it kind of being defined different ways, and I just want to make sure as we're looking at the data that we're aligned there.
Yeah, and Janelle, we can connect on that.
Okay, great.
Great. Okay, we have 1 minute left. I thank you all for this thoughtful conversation, and we'll see what we can bring up for our next meeting in regards to data. I think we really need to continue this, dig a little bit deeper, but also at our next meeting, maybe be focusing a little bit on what we want to move forward and tackle. Like, I know we aren't going to get to it. I knew we weren't going to get to it today. This is brainstorming. I want you all to take this information back. We'll send out this slideshow to you all to kind of mull over, think about a bit more, send more information our way. Alex and I are you can send, more questions our way in between the meeting. Or if you're like, ooh, I forgot about this data, please, let's see if we have anything there. Please send it to us. One thing I do want to bring up in our 30 seconds, I will actually be out at our next meeting. So I am wondering if we can move it up a week earlier to the 3rd Thursday of the month to continue this conversation, because I will be out of town. So I'm just wondering if anyone, that would be the 16th. If anyone has any objections, or you can get back to me, but I'm proposing to move it to May 16th so that we can all get together. Okay, see some head nods, thumbs up. Great. Okay, we'll move it to the 16th so that we can all continue the conversation. I don't want to leave it out there. So, okay, fantastic. Thank you all. I hope you have a good week, and thanks for staying on.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks,
take care.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.